everybody. I apologize that I'm not doing the like really traditional speaker thing of always looking into the camera because I really like to see your beautiful faces and see your reactions. So if it looks like I'm not making eye contact, it's because I'm actually looking at you. So hope that's okay. I'm so excited to be here with you all again today. Thank you so much for joining us last week and again this week. Hopefully you're going to learn some really good, tangible things today that you can apply immediately. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just pulling up the screen right now. So today what we're going to be talking about is getting out of our own way. So I love it that actually somebody mentioned that just a minute ago, because in our last session, we talked about what's holding us back. So today we're actually going to take a deeper look at how the patterns that we have are holding us back and how we can actually start to get out of our own way. And then in our next session, we'll talk about how to really unleash more of your full potential. So for anybody who wasn't here last time, I wanted to do a quick recap of what we covered. And also in case you've slept or been sick like me, it might be good to just do a quick review. So we'll do that quickly. So we covered just a couple of the bullets are the highlights are what authenticity really means. And in case you have forgotten, authenticity isn't some grand destination of being your true self as though it is one thing and it never changes. Rather, if we look back at the origin of the term, what it really means is to act on one's own authority, which I interpret as meaning to be in intention, to act, think, and live with intention, which means that it's really a moment by moment choice that we make to practice again and again and again. And the thing that keeps us from being authentic, that keeps us from being intentional in those moments is actually that much of the time, rather than thinking and behaving very consciously, 95% of our actions and our thoughts are unconscious. And that's what's really limiting us because we're not even aware that it's happening. So what's really driving our behaviors are these very unconscious reactions. And what makes us react unconsciously is fear. It's coming from a place of self-protection. And that's where identity comes in, because identity is intrinsically linked to our feeling of survival, of belonging and acceptance. So our identity is not us. It's who we see ourselves to be, who we think we should be, and really importantly, who we can't be. And all of those things are what keep us in that place of feeling like we're a part of the tribe. And when one of those things feels like it's at risk, that's what makes us unconsciously react. And that's what keeps us from being authentic. So if you really think about it, what keeps us from our authenticity is often our identity. So the more that we understand our patterns of identity and these unconscious reactions that we have, the freer we are to expand our range and become much more authentic in the moment and in our lives. So with that, we're going to take a look at today's activities and today's learning, which is really about these unconscious patterns of reaction and how we can short circuit them so that we can start being much more intentional in the moment. So what we're going to do is actually do a quick activity. This is not the same activity that you did last week, and this will be a much less sort of maybe profound or deep activity, but it will hopefully give you a little bit more clue about your identity and certainly help you get into the next learning that we're going to be, the next lesson that we're going to be doing. So what I want for you to do is take out a pen and paper if you don't have one right now, and just reflect for a quick second. In your career, how do you actively work to be perceived? How do you want to be perceived? How do you want people to know you, to think about you? Write down 3 to 5 characteristics, not the actual job title, but characteristics, traits. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to the second question. So the second question is, how do you not want to be perceived? So when you think about work, if you were to imagine being perceived in these ways that just feel absolutely dreadful, not just bad, but really bad, dreadful, like it feels so far away from who you are that it would feel terrible for somebody to imagine, to think of you in that way. Write down 3 to 5 of those. Okay. So if you did the activity with us last week, you may see some similar trends or patterns, even from what you wrote down last week. You may not. Often they are the same patterns, but they sort of look different on the surface. They manifest differently. So that's okay. No matter what, it's totally fine. Just this will be a great way to sort of like get into where we're going with this. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts before we move into this next part? Okay.
A crazy amount of overlaps between this week and last week. That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Does anybody else have the same experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
anybody like, whoa, I feel like these are totally different things. Like I made totally different lists. There's no overlap. No. Okay. That's good. I'm going to take that as a good sign. But if you don't see any overlap, it's okay. You've not done anything wrong.
Like a half and half.
Yeah. Okay, good. Excellent. And you can also do this. I chose career because I'm sure we sort of think of this as, or at least I think of this as a mostly career networking group, although it certainly expands well beyond that. But you can actually do this with any identity related like role. So you could do this as a parent. You want to be perceived as, you don't want to be perceived as a spouse or a significant other. And if you were to do it across a number of different roles, you'd probably start to see some themes that if you were to pair them, you'd start to get to some of those things that we wrote out last week. But again, for the purpose of this, it's just more a matter of like getting you to reflect on ways that you want to be seen and ways you don't want to be seen. And the reason that's important is because when we don't want to be seen in certain ways, we react. And we take these patterns of how we want to be seen and how we don't want to be seen and how we react everywhere we go. Like I mentioned, they may look different on the surface, but underneath, they're very likely related to deep identity related triggers or feelings of who we think we must be in order to belong or be accepted. And again, that's the stuff that we talked about last week. And the reason this is so important is because when it comes to that sort of like deep level of acceptance or belonging, because it is a human necessity, it's part of our survival for us to belong and to be accepted because we're tribal species and we need it to survive. When we feel like that is at risk, we are no longer consciously in charge of our actions so much as we are unconsciously reacting in self-protection. Does that make sense? So it's like we kind of, it's like we don't have to remind ourselves to breathe. We don't need to remind ourselves to protect an identity. We have to sort of be aware that we're doing it so we can keep ourselves from doing it. So this is really important because when we unconsciously get triggered, or when we get triggered and we start to unconsciously react, what we're doing is we're attempting to hide the cracks in our facade. So these are cracks in the facade. So what we're doing is we're trying to prevent ourselves from exposing these parts of ourselves, which we believe would make us unworthy of belonging. And there are 3 primary ways. So the research calls these slightly different terms, but so I've renamed them, but I'll tell you what the research actually calls them as well. And the reason that I love this is because this is a really easy way for you to start to see when you're triggered, even if your identity patterns are feeling a little bit less visible to you. So the first, when we react in self-protection, many of us, what we do, we call it shut it down. This is moving away, or I like to think of it as isolating or withdrawing. So this may look like in a meeting that you don't speak up, or that you keep secrets, or that you withhold opinions, or you physically move away from, or you hang up on people. I've seen, when I was in corporate, when I worked at Google, many of the clients that I worked on, it's much easier to see from the outside. They would have certain departments inside of their companies where they did what I called it power hoarding and moat building. Have you ever seen this in a company where the department sort of like they create a power structure so that people on the outside can't tell what they don't know? That's this idea of kind of withdrawing. That's why there's a castle with a moat around it. That's what I call power hoarding and moat building. So this happens in our personal lives and it happens in our professional lives all the time, but it's the idea of moving away. The second reactive pattern is what I call turning it up, or I like to think of it as dancing for my dinner. In the research, this is called moving toward. And what this is people pleasing. It's the chameleon. It's the person who is turning themselves into whoever they think the other person wants them to be. Because the more that we turn ourselves into the person they want us to be, the less you will see the cracks in the facade. So if I just keep moving, if I keep shifting, if I keep shape shifting, then you won't see the cracks in my facade, because eventually I'll get it right. That's sort of the idea with this reactive pattern. And the third reactive pattern, and this came up in discussion last week, this is what I like to call firing away. This is moving against in the research. This is the idea of I am going to make it so that you feel like I'm deflecting the attention back onto you. I'm going to fire a bullet or drop a bomb back on you, because if I deflect the attention off of me and offload it onto you, then you won't notice the cracks in my facade. You'll be too busy defending yourself to notice the cracks in my facade. Does that make sense? So this can be shame, blame, criticism, judgment, all those ways that we kind of throw our insecurity, our discomfort onto other people. And this is sometimes when somebody asked the question last week, I can't remember exactly how it came up, but it was those people who say they're very authentic. Well, I was just being authentic. These are often people who are firing away. These are people who feel very uncomfortable, but they offload their discomfort onto other people, trying to make the other person feel wrong so that the attention gets deflected off of them and onto the other person in terms of that sort of the curiosity. And so if you've ever been in a gaslighting situation, gaslighters are often the people who fall into this category as well. And what you will notice is often in relationships, especially, people pair with each other. So a firing away, a person whose primary reactive pattern is firing away will often pair with somebody who turns it up, because those go very nicely together in a power dynamic, not in a, this is a great, very non-toxic relationship, but in a power dynamic, a power play kind of way. So anyway, these are the three primary reactive patterns. We do all of them, but we tend to go to one more often than the others, especially in certain settings. So what we're going to do now is actually have you break up into groups and talk about what your go-to reactive pattern is, when you notice it coming up and with whom. And what do you observe about others that you work with or live with, or the people that are in your life? What reactive pattern do they have? Does anybody need me to go through those three reactive patterns again?
I think I do.
How many people admit to fire away?
Yeah. So yeah, shut it down. So that's like withdrawal or isolation, turn it up, people pleasing, chameleon, fire away is more like the shaming, judgment, criticism, the people who are like more vocally aggressive usually. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see you. And Jake, I think we're ready. So what we're going to do now is go into groups and just discuss for about 6 minutes or so what comes up for you as you learn about these. What do you notice about your primary reactive pattern, and when it comes up, how it shows up, and other people in your lives?
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open this up.
Okay.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah.
Always one.
I wasn't sure if, because we didn't talk about if I was going into a group or not, but
Yeah, we'll keep it the same way we did.
perfect.
You're gonna move manual to room 5. There
There it goes. Yeah. That usually has to do with somebody's internet's not great.
Yeah, it looked like he was frozen, although it
Yeah.
could have been his screen. But
That's interesting. That's really, really those patterns.
oh yeah, we could be a group. What did you think?
No, it's look, it resonates. Ever, I bring it up, but it's not always, like easy to talk about when I'm going to be 50 this year. I have an 18-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl that's soon going to be 16, and I'm not the one who disciplines them.
Mhm,
I'm not really sure how to.
mhm,
I know why. My wife really takes that role, and she can get pretty hot, but I shut down
mhm,
badly when those types of issues arise or when something has to be done.
mm,
Probably because my mother was our disciplinarian, really never taught me anything.
mm. Wow,
Yeah,
that's really good insight.
yeah. Well, he taught me how to be a criminal, and he
Mm,
taught me it was okay to lie, cheat, and steal to, do things. And look, I'm okay talking about that because we talk about these during breakouts and different topics that we have
mhm,
because we are family here and we are community. But that is still, as a 50-year-old man, it's like, I don't know how to handle it.
mm,
No clue. No clue.
mm.
So thank God for my missus. I'm there to support you. But she gets crazy too. Like, how come? Why can't you do something? Why can't you speak up? Why And I try to explain, and it's like a repetitive story. She knows, but then that leads into her parents, and her upbringing is very different than my parents and my upbringing, and there's always a clash when certain triggers arise.
Mhm. Yeah, that's
So
really
but it's like the thing. It's we're yin and yin and yang sometimes works really, really, really well, and it
Mhm,
has for 21 years. So
mhm. Hmm.
Awesome.
Such good insight. Jake, what did you notice?
Um,
Or were you participating? You didn't have to, but
I'm gonna be honest with you, I was working on breakouts. I didn't really get the questions that you had.
that's okay.
But the list I thought was interesting because there's things that I am very protective of that I don't want people to think of me. And
Mm,
if somebody either wrongly accuses me of that or puts a message out there that says I'm that way, even though I didn't do that, I get extremely defensive.
mm,
So, I mean, one of the biggest things is that I try to be extremely attentive
mhm,
to my clients. And if somebody says I'm not, then that automatically triggers me because that makes such a difference in what I do and how important it is in what I do.
mm,
And there's been cases where I haven't been, and that flare up is not necessarily the correct way to deal with it.
mhm,
But when somebody accuses me of that and I have been, it almost becomes even more defensive because
mm.
I'm so protective of that.
And when you get defensive, how do you get defensive? Do you like get
Um,
mean, like aggressive, or do you get more like you shut
I can
down?
get passive aggressive with my
Passive
messaging,
aggressive. Okay.
but more than likely I will back away. And I
Okay.
think that kind of goes together. It's like I'll back away, but then I'll send a message that basically is, no, I didn't do this wrong in a passive aggressive way. And
Ah.
that has gotten me in trouble. It actually got me in trouble with one of my biggest clients
Mm,
because I answered the question abruptly and they didn't like that. And I couldn't understand that, but that's a whole culture thing in that company that you don't just write an email for email's sake. You ask how they're doing, you make it more personal. And I was sitting on a couch, I answered the question. Like,
mhm,
what did you want me to do? And that was me learning how their culture is different than how I run my own business. So that was an interesting thing to learn. But
Yeah.
my message was a little passive aggressive, and I knew that. And so when I got caught, I had to apologize for it.
Mm.
So
Were you
it was
apologizing for the passive aggressiveness or for the initial abruptness?
probably the abruptness more, because I think the reason it was abrupt was because I was trying to be a little passive aggressive. Thank you, Lane.
You got it.
So it was interesting because I had to talk to several people because I'm a contractor. I don't necessarily deal with their culture.
Mhm.
And when I learned that, I was like, okay, so I don't answer emails right away. I take a couple hours, step back from it, then answer it.
Mhm.
They may want that answer right away, but they don't want it in a very abrupt way. So it's a very interesting balance to try to have with them.
So interesting, and so much energy expended just trying to fit within their very sensitive culture.
Yes, yes. And I see it when we do other trainings too, how other company cultures are very different than them and very different than myself. So that's interesting to see.
Welcome back.
There's never enough time when the conversation starts getting interesting.
We have.
I felt
yeah, we
like
have a
Gong
double-
Show. I got yanked mid-sentence.
That's it's one of
Me
the
too.
hardest parts about facilitating virtual groups, because when it's in person, you can see what the energy is doing and you know to give them more time. But
I
we're
was
flying blind
struggling.
here.
Lisa's beautiful daughter joined us, so I was really choosing my words carefully, and I stopped paying attention to the clock.
So it sounds like some more really good conversation. So what came up? What did you notice?
In my group, I think there was an interesting concept of maybe as a young entrepreneur, when you start, you kind of shut down first, but then slowly as you get more mature, you feel comfortable communicating directly your intentions, not firing away, because that has an ad hominem attack aspect to it. Like, I build myself up by knocking you down, which is not good. But maybe the initial thing is a shutdown, but then you say, I assess the situation. I'm like, you know what? No, I need to say this in his face directly. Empathy, obviously, but not attacking, the fact that he's bald or she is blah, blah, blah. Like,
Hey,
focusing on his
oh.
thought. Well, I'm bald too. Come on. We're both brothers. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. So an observation about how our patterns change as we get, it sounds like, not just older, but more confident in ourselves.
Find your voice.
As well. Yeah.
And, I recognize my partner Lane for teaching me, not to always fire away, process, shut it down, think about it. And like I told my group, my response now is never what it was an hour ago.
Interesting.
So I thank, Leno.
Don't hit send. Don't hit send, Alan. Let's talk it through.
I used to have a big nuclear button. I couldn't help myself. Christy.
What? No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Christy's got her hand.
Yeah.
No, I was clapping at it.
Oh.
Sorry, no,
Neko.
just doing this.
Yeah, I want to say that in our group, we in the very beginning, we started saying, like Harvey was saying, that it depends who you're interacting with, very much, and we started talking about clients, because I was mentioning that in a group like V5O, where you feel safe. You have to feel safe to open yourself. You have to feel safe to show your cracks. When you're dealing with a prospect or you're dealing with a client, of course you don't want to show your cracks. Like Joe Ciolino was saying, like, we only hear about the fuck ups that people did when they are very successful and millionaires. We don't hear it when they are on the way, and that's true, because of course everybody fails. Of course, everybody is going to fail in something, and that's how you learn. But you don't want to talk about it when you are with a prospect. You want to be perceived as professional. You want to be perceived as someone that knows what they're talking about.
And
So
that was muck ups with an M. by the way, right?
I definitely heard an M for sure.
Okay.
I didn't drop that F-bomb.
Fuck up, fuck up. Sorry.
But I'm
It was her. Yes.
Oh, yes,
Exactly.
that was the bark in the background. That was the F sound. But I am curious, when you feel as though you might not be perceived in the way that you want to be as the professional, as the person to be trusted, how do you react? What is that sort of instantaneous reaction?
On my end, if someone, not about perceiving, someone's trying to explain what I said or trying to put words in my mouth, I told them, you know what? I can explain myself. Don't put words in my mouth, please. And, and I
Okay.
come back and I try to
Almost shutting the other person down.
not necessarily shouting, but telling him, don't put words in my mouth. Don't
Yeah.
rephrase it. I'm capable of communicating on my own.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Which
know.
is interesting. I would, may I say something to that? Because I think what you're saying is really interesting,
Sure.
because to what I'm hearing, and I'm just making this up, so I could be wrong, is that's boundaries. That's a really good example of a boundary. And boundaries can get very confusing. Boundaries versus walls, reactions versus intention, like all of this stuff gets really fuzzy. But I think that's what you just said is a really, really good example of a boundary. Like, I don't need you to speak for me. I can do this myself.
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself, and I don't know if you can see my cup here, but the name says The Godfather. So
Okay.
coming from an Italian from Brooklyn, living in Charlotte, I've gotten labeled a certain way, and Alan will tell you stories. Anyway,
Snitch. He's
Yes.
He
witness
doesn't throw
protection.
bombs, he throws horse heads.
so I clearly described myself with a Godfather complex, because I knew if you asked for a favor, there was going to be a time you were going to be called for that. So when I was not perceived as the trustworthy, hardworking, kind of visionary, I would just snap sometimes.
Mm.
And I used to really come at the person. So I switched from turning it up, being the people pleaser, giving, paying it forward, to just firing away. And it's only with maturity that now I'm starting to take that breath. I'm starting to pause. And I love, in our group, we were three of us started out as turning it up. But we didn't give Amir a moment to talk, and it was great because I think Ahmad had brought it up, is the empathy part of this. And that's where I think we could slow down a little bit and truly listen to what's going on and realize they're not attacking you. There's something going on with them.
I love that. It's like you all are teeing up what we're going to be learning next. This is so fabulous. Amir, did you have your hand up?
Did he? Okay. I feel that if you're not being perceived the way you would like to be perceived, then you have to dig deeper inside yourself and figure out where the disconnect is. If you want to blame it on the outside influences, that's your choice, but then you're making yourself into the victim. And, we could all be victims by choice. But if we're not getting where we want to be, we're not accomplishing what we want to be, I think we have to look in the mirror before we, go attacking other people.
Harvey's middle name is Amir, so we have to clarify.
Harvey, to sort of play off of what you just said, and then Amir, we're coming to you next, so be ready. Is because I think the victim concept came up last week as well. And I'm sure it sounds like it's come up for you all in previous conversations. I make that up, but I assume so. There's the victim, the villain, and the hero, right? So we tend to play into one of those three. And for many of us, when we come from this victim place, it's this thing happened to me, as opposed to, of course, the sort of cliched and overused phrase, but that really makes a lot of sense. This happened for me. And I think, I absolutely agree, Harvey, with what you said, that we have to be willing to look at what is it that we're reacting to, what caused us to be triggered. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I think that there is a part, though, where we have to understand that the other person's reaction is not on us always. We don't have to take responsibility for how somebody else feels. We first have to take responsibility for how we feel and how we show up. And so when we are coming from a place of reactivity, it's much, much more likely to cause the other person to react as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But anyway, I just want to parse that out because I think it's really important that we don't overextend ourselves to be responsible for somebody else. Our first and foremost responsibility is for ourselves, and to really be, whole and pure for ourselves. Amir, you're up.
Do you have time during your workshop for my comment?
We absolutely have time for you, please.
Wonderful. We had a great conversation with the four of us, and I came up, well, can I say we from my team? We came up with a fourth way in addition to your three. Perhaps it would be instructive for us. And that is that of an empathizer and / listener. I put myself under that category. A while back, when I say about maybe a couple of decades ago, I learned that a lot of people say, you know something, I'm direct. And I just say it as it is. Well, I respect that 100%, but I have never seen very much positive results coming out of that. You won't get anything but by cornering people. But what you get out, if you listen well and see what triggered them, what word, what action, and learn and see what the reaction is to that, and see if you feel comfortable not pushing those trigger points. That is not a people pleaser. That is not a fire away. That is not shutting down. It is really to understand. And then there are two choices that you make in life. You're either a teacher, you decide that you're just going to tell. The other one is that of a learner. You say, how can I add to what I already know if you're interested in human relationships? And I have listened that I've learned that by listening, I end up doing a lot better. While everyone thinks that, and I said, no pun intended, none whatsoever, we all have different personalities, and I respect that. But cornering people just does not help. And I learned that from my veteran friends who had come back from the Vietnam War. And they said, Amir, wherever we go, we don't like to have our backs to the wall. And pay attention to veterans. They don't. They don't want to be backed into a corner because their reaction is completely unpredictable. They just jump at you. So I learned not to corner people. Maybe that would be helpful to some, maybe not all.
I love that. Thank you so much. And it absolutely is. I would say that that's not a fourth reactive pattern. That's a very intentional choice of authenticity in this case. The distinction being reactive patterns are those things that when we're cornered, when we feel triggered, when we feel unsafe at some level, that we react automatically, instantaneously. So this is, it might be akin to the freeze, fight, flight, or if you haven't heard of this, the fourth one is fawn. That's a one I never really hear about, but fawn is like the people pleasing, and it's a very real survival mechanism, defense mechanism. So it's like those things that we just automatically, instantaneously, our bodies physiologically start to respond. But Amir, you're absolutely right that what you're talking about is much more conscious and intentional, and that's actually what we're going to be headed to next. So thank you for that very much. It's not to say, again, we do this because we're human and we have an innate need to survive. And so we can't actually stop ourselves to something that I think Neko said last week. We cannot keep ourselves from having these emotions, having these reactions. They're natural. They are part of who we are. Fear is one of the most innate physiological experiences that we have. But what we can do is choose what we do with it, how we respond to it. So that's what we're going to be talking about now. So it's not to say that we should be super proud of these reactive patterns. They're just part of who we are. And it's important to pay attention to when they show up, because it means there's something underneath it that's triggered you that you can start to get underneath. When you can get underneath it, that's when you can start to make bigger, more meaningful changes. So we're going to go ahead and head back into the lesson. Hold on, let me just screen share. So the reason this is so important is because most of us are reacting unconsciously way more of the time than we actually think we are. I mean, you know, anything from the way that you're driving in your car to the way that your spouse says something to you, to the way an email comes in, any of it. And so it's no wonder we're so exhausted all the time. We're actually kind of going through the world with our shields up unknowingly, and again, unconsciously. And again, as I said a minute ago, one of the reasons this is really important is because when we come into an experience unconsciously shielded with our shield up and with these reactive patterns, because of the way that our human brain is constructed, we will always pick up on and believe nonverbal cues more than we will verbal ones. So it doesn't really matter what you're saying. It matters how you're saying it, the energy that you're using, the way that your body is you're holding your body, the tone of your voice, the speed, the breath, all of those things matter. And because again, 95% of everything you think and do is unconscious, there's no way to control for all of that to ensure that you actually always come across consistently with what your words are saying. Your nonverbals will always give you away, will always be a tell. So that's important for sales and all kinds of other things too. But so the more that you can consciously and intentionally put your shield down, the more that it actually invites other people to do the same, to be vulnerable. That's one of the reasons this group works so well, is that you all put your shields down. And so even newcomers feel comfortable doing the same very quickly, because they already pick up on the fact that you are doing it. So the more you can do that in work settings, even with clients or prospects, the easier it is for those people to respond in kind. So just to move into, what do you actually do with this? Okay, so great. So now you kind of know which reactive pattern you use. Maybe you've even started to see which reactive pattern your spouse or your colleague or your manager uses. What is great about that is that when you see them react in that way, now you know they're coming from a place of fear. They're not just jerks. They're just afraid at some level. So it's much easier to act, back to what a couple people said, with empathy rather than from a place of, again, being reactive in kind. But now we're going to learn what I call the magic wand. And this is a simple 3-step process that you can use in any moment that you start to feel triggered to help you respond with much more intention and authenticity. And the 3 steps are reflect, accept, redirect. So we're going to go through this. And if it's okay with you, I'm actually going to turn my screen share off so that I can see you and we can talk through this. And then I'll just tell you, I'll just, say the things that are important for you to know. Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So we'll use an example to go through this because I think it's helpful. So, reflect is the first step. So it's, again, the 3 steps are reflect, accept, redirect. And you all kind of talked about this already. So there's nothing mind-blowing here, but if you needed something that was mind-blowing, it probably isn't going to help you when you feel triggered. So it's better to keep it really, really simple. So in the first step, reflect. As soon as you notice yourself starting to feel triggered, the very first thing is, before you actually react, go inward and reflect. What is the physical experience I'm having? Again, our body knows that we've been triggered often before our mind does, because it starts to respond. It starts, you start learn what your tells are, whether it's sweating, like for me, doesn't matter what it is, like my face turns red. So and I can feel it, of course, other people can see it. It's very embarrassing. But, again, whether it's sweating your palms, you feel queasy, whatever it might be, notice these things, because when you start to notice that and you reflect, you'll go, oh, I just got triggered with something. So here's the example. I had a client recently who was telling me he's a new leader at a big tech company. And his primary reactive pattern is to turn it up. So he's a people pleaser. He needs to prove his worth and constantly be reproving it all the time. And by the way, that's mine too. That's most of the people I work with. And so he was in a meeting with his new manager, and his manager had asked him to show him a proposal that he had put together for a big project that was going to cost millions and millions of dollars for this new team he was rolling out. And after he went through the entire proposal, the only thing the manager said, the very first thing out of his mouth is that all you got? I mean, I would react immediately. I think most of us would, because you're a new employee. He's a people pleaser. He wants to impress. It's his manager. It's a new project. Like, there's all the reasons. So before he reacted, what he did is he turned inward and he reflected. So he noticed that he was starting to like have a response or a reaction, I should say. The other part of reflect, though, is what is the story I'm telling myself? That is the key here. It's not what physical experience am I having. That's just a way to notice. That's the flag. The reflection is, what is the story I'm telling myself about what I just heard, about the experience I just had? In almost all cases, we as human beings, we are storytellers by nature. And when we don't have all the facts, we'll make them up and then we'll believe them as though they are facts. And so that's called assumptions. And we use them as though they are real. And what we're doing in this case with this particular example I'm using, he was probably making up a story that the manager hated him, thought that the work was terrible. And then, it kind of continued. I'm sure that if you track the story, it's going, my manager hated this. My manager probably hates me, thinks I'm incapable. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to not get this project. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to live under a bridge. That's usually the way it goes. And I joke about the living under a bridge thing, but I've heard it so many times in so many ways that most of us actually do at some level. We're afraid that like that worst case scenario is going to happen. And here's the thing, that's what we're reacting to in the moment. The reaction to, is that all you got? Isn't, this guy might be kind of like questioning me. It's, oh my God, I'm going to lose my house and I'm going to live under a bridge. And so we're trying to protect ourselves from that worst case scenario. So when you can reflect and notice the story you're telling yourself, that is the key to being able to make the change inside of yourself. So the second step is accept. Accept doesn't mean, okay, great, this guy's a jerk. So like, cool, what do I do with that? What it means is accept that you just had a reaction, accept that you just caught yourself telling yourself a story, and allow it to be there. Don't do anything with it. So in neuroscience, what they've actually found is that the physiological lifespan of an emotion is 90 seconds. That's it. From the time an emotion starts, peaks, and dissipates, if you don't do anything to it, it's 90 seconds. So if you can just kind of like let the discomfort be there for 90 seconds, it will go away enough so that you are much more clear-headed and level-headed. So the only thing that makes it last longer is if you latch onto it, you do something with it, you like try to fight it away, or you hold on to it and you start telling yourself stories based on it. So the more that you can just let it be there, take a breath, give yourself space, that's accept that you just caught yourself telling a story. You're having this very uncomfortable experience right now, but it'll go away very quickly. That allows you to make that pivot. Does that make sense? Absolutely. So then the third step is to redirect. And this is where you come into the moment with a much more intention. This is that stepping forward with empathy, with curiosity, with questions, with openness, rather than having to defend or having to react or having to please or whatever it might be that the reaction was. Many of us know how we actually want to show up. So some people go, well, like, what does that mean when I redirect? Most of us know how we want to show up. It's just that we get sidetracked somewhere in the middle. So it's going back to that place of how we actually wanted to show up in the beginning. And in some cases, the words may not change. So back to this example, my client might have still said, well, what do you mean by that? Could have been the same thing he would have said in a reaction. But in this case, again, back to the nonverbals, it can sound very different. The energy behind it goes from, well, what did you mean by that? Or what did you mean by that, in a defensive way, to a much more open and curious, what did you mean by that? I'd love to hear more. Would love to hear your thoughts. It's about that energetic openness and curiosity. So I know that I've just given you a whole lot, but hopefully this can sort of explains the reflect, accept, redirect. Those are super simple steps that you can take that any moment allow you to go from a place of reacting to acting with intention. So I'll pause there and see what questions you have. I think I see Neko has a question. Yes, or a comment.
It's more of a comment, but I just wanted to add, I don't know if I'm adding a step here, but maybe it's in between, but something that I've learned mainly from my mindfulness meditation practice is to ground yourself. To ground yourself like as a technique, like physically. Because I'm like you, Erica. I turn red in the face immediately. I am red naturally, but when I get angry or that's people see it in my face.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, taking a deep breath and trying when you focus on your body, like how you're like how you're seated, how your feet are touching the ground. If you do that for a few seconds, you don't let that story continue in your head. Mm-hmm. The story that you said in the first place. Because yeah, we go into a story and the story just gets worse, and then it's yeah,
spiral. Absolutely.
So one of the ways that I've learned, and I try to do that, not always successful, but one of the ways is ground yourself. Like, okay, take a deep breath, feel your body, and then just.
I love that. And that's definitely one of the primary things that I use and that I often teach as part of the accept is it's the pause. It's the pause that allows the pivot. And in the accept, it's taking that breath and reconnecting to your physical experience. Because one of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but we breathe really shallowly when we feel unsafe because our body is readying itself for flight or fight or freeze or whatever. And so that actually automatically keeps us in the spiral. So if you can allow yourself the space to actually breathe more deeply, then that short circuits the physiological response that your body is already starting to have. The other thing that I will say, so that's kind of like bringing the mind and the body together. In the accept part of the mind, many of us, like some of us are pretty good about recognizing our stories. Like we've done enough work that we go, oh yeah, here's that story again. And then we go, God, I'm so stupid. Why do I keep telling myself that story? Right? Like we shame ourselves into the fact that we've just caught ourselves telling ourselves a story that we've been telling for however many years we are old. The problem is you can't get to positivity by fighting negativity with negativity. So when you notice yourself telling yourself a story, it's a really important time to actually celebrate. I call it giving yourself a mental high five, because it's the only way to actually, again, short circuit that negativity, because you need to get out of that sort of like neural pathway of negativity. And the only way you can do it is by being positive with yourself. So this is an opportunity to give yourself grace. I can give you all the science if you want. I just think that people get bored by it. So I only give you a little bit usually. Other thoughts, comments?
If I could ask you, Erica, reflect, accept, redirect, get it, hear you, resonates. I think we all do. I also believe that takes some practice and conditioning.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the science, do we have to consciously think about this more when we experience this?
Okay, so that's such a great question. So what I would say, there are a few things here. First, it's kind of like if you tried to go into, I don't know, anything that was a pro sport or whatever without any training. If you hadn't done a lot of practicing in advance, it would be very difficult for you to be very successful at it. So when you're triggered, that's not usually the time to start trying this stuff out, like really hardcore triggered. Start by noticing, build. The reason we started with all the identity stuff is, and even your reactive patterns, build your repertoire, or write down your repertoire. Get really familiar with what it is. What are your go-to patterns? When do you notice yourself get triggered? What do you tend to do so that you can be on the lookout? It's kind of like building a field guide to yourself, because then it's so much easier to be aware of it when it happens. But if you're not already on the lookout for it, it's much more difficult in the moment. And then the other thing is that what I would say is start really small. I call it micro decisions, and we'll probably talk about this again next week. Micro steps or micro decisions. A lot of us as high achievers, we go big or go home. So, we get some nugget like, oh, I found my reactive pattern, so I'm going to go test out this reflect, accept, redirect. And then it doesn't go well. And it hurts. Either, because we've like tested an identity that we want to try to move beyond, or whatever it is. That happens to me regularly, and it really hurts, or used to. So what I would say is start very small with what I call micro steps or micro decisions, with small things that the outcome doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're practicing taking a step that enables you to be much more authentic and vulnerable, just with whoever it is. I'll give you just a quick example. When I first started coaching, I was absolutely terrible at it, because for me, what was safe was being in control, having all the answers, knowing exactly what somebody else was going to say so that I could be one step ahead of it, which of course meant that I was terrible in conversation because I was not present. I was always like anticipating somebody else's answer so that I looked good with whatever I was going to say next. You can't do that in coaching. You have no idea what's going to happen in a coaching conversation. So the way that I started practicing this is by coaching my Uber drivers as I was taking trips, because they were people I was never going to say again. They weren't paying me. They had no idea that I was coaching them. We would just have conversations, and I would practice this in a very, very safe way. So whatever it is that makes sense for you, these are really good micro steps for you to take that enable you to feel safe with whatever outcome, because you're just practicing it. Does that make sense? And it allows you to show up more authentically. Don't start with like really important people in your life or really important situations. That's why the advice to just be your true self in a job interview or a date or something like that is terrible advice, because if you're not used to being yourself, like that feels super dangerous.
I hope no one reaches out to me after this and wants to try it out on me.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
See, Robert's got his hand up.
Oh, yes.
So for me, it's more of a timing thing. So you talked about the 90 seconds, but, in an in-person, which isn't so much now during the pandemic, but an in-person situation on the phone, Alan talked about the email. I can take a breath and write something stupid and say, delete, I'm not sending this. But in person, or somebody's abusing you on the phone, how do you reflect and, take that time?
Yeah.
So my feeling, and I'm not going to talk about my personal life again, but for me, it's sort of like the Israeli mentality. You drop a bomb on me, I'm going to drop 4 on you.
Yeah.
And just bury you. And it doesn't win. It's a non-win situation. It just, that feeling to me, it's a defense mechanism as opposed to being smart or wise. I teach my children, walk away. It's not worth it. Somebody wants to fight you. What are you fighting over? He stole your lunch money. Walk away. You should stand up for yourself, but it's not worth some physical confrontation. Somebody cuts you off on the highway or something. It's not worth, you never know what the other person is. So just calm yourself down and accept it and then move on. But like I said, to me, it's a timing.
Have the luxury of 90 seconds to just pause here for 90 seconds.
Can you just hold that thought a minute? I'll get back to you in a second.
Just give me a minute and a half. I'll be right back. It absolutely. I'm so glad you asked the question. It's not to say that we have the luxury of time in those situations. Believe me, I get it. It's more about because feelings feel so powerful and so real, and that need to hit, or whatever it is, can feel so overwhelming that if we can just remember, if we don't attach to it, it will go away quickly. And instead of giving ourselves 90 seconds to just let it cool down, it's more being aware that it's going to cool down on its own in 90 seconds, but we can usually redirect much more quickly. The other thing I would say though is often we're not usually reacting to the thing in front of us. Like there's a deeper identity challenge there. So the more that you're able to get the rage or anger or whatever out, like I have to go to rage rooms. I don't look like I would have a lot of rage, but apparently I do. So, getting like in very healthy ways, the more you can express that in healthy ways, the less you'll find the need to prevent it from expressing itself in unhealthy ways, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
What do you find when the person who's practicing pauses those 90 seconds? What is the person that's causing the conflict doing in those 90 seconds, staring at the person being quiet?
Yeah. Again, that could be very awkward. I don't know. I haven't really been the fly on the wall in those situations. I wouldn't say again that you necessarily, if you have the luxury of waiting in 90 seconds, like if you can, with like in a fight with your child or something, like just close the door and walk away, or a spouse or whatever, that's great. If you don't have the luxury, it's not about saying you have to give yourself 90 seconds before you respond. It's about saying, don't attach to that emotion and it will go away in 90 seconds. So it's kind of going, okay, if I can just let myself breathe for a second, not attach to that anger, the frustration, the whatever it is, and then redirect, the feeling itself will go away. Does that make sense? So it's not about waiting the 90 seconds. It's about going, okay, this just gonna be there. It's kind of like parking lot, the idea of like, we're going to parking lot that in corporate speak. It's kind of like putting it in the parking lot. Just leave it there. Just don't do
Erika,
anything with it.
have you ever read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss?
I have not. Does he say something like the opposite of that?
No, exactly spot on to what you're saying. He's a former FBI like terrorism and robbery negotiator.
Oh.
And he's on the other side of these high intense situations where he has to not react in the moment, and someone with their literal life on the line and others has to trust him from not knowing him 30 seconds before they got on the phone.
Yeah.
So like exactly what you're saying, like he could be yelled at, and instead of firing away back at him and trying to escalate the situation, you never bark back at a barking dog. You just say like, it seems like you're really upset with this situation.
Yeah.
And then like people will just come out and say more and more and more. So when you play the mind game like that, and I take that into business, he does business coaching classes, right?
Yeah.
Exactly like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like take the time to pause, reflect, and then dissipate that conversation, and you can change the whole game within a minute or two. It's
absolutely. And I love what you said, because even you pulled in empathy. Like it seems like it's a more, in my opinion, it's a more advanced skill, because some people, if you just start out, it can sound a little condescending. If you go, it sounds like you're whatever. So again, it's really more about how you say it than what you say.
The tone.
So, but yes, I love that. Thank you. I'm so glad that I didn't say something that was totally different.
No, that's exactly what I've been searching and learning about for over a year with Chris Voss stuff. So no, well done. This is amazing.
Joe, send that name over to Anthony for the book club.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just got over that book, and it's phenomenal. I definitely recommend it.
I'm looking forward to the group. I mean, there's so many similarities. I started sharing in my group about our upper limit problems and getting into that subconscious that we don't even realize when we are reacting. So I'm looking
forward. The great thing about Zoom is you can go off screen, and this works really well when you just scream into your arm.
The stress.
Can I bring up one last thing?
Yeah.
Please.
Can I bring up like an angle I've discovered, at least for myself and others, is if you have meetings after lunch when you're not hungry, because Fred Costas, we can bring it up lunch. I think blood sugar affects things.
Oh, 100%.
Like I've noticed, if I take clients and it's an afternoon, if it's a lunch, basically this is what I do. If I'm discussing something, we haven't signed a contract, we usually go out towards lunch and over the food. When it's time to sign the actual contract, we go to like a lounge or coffee shop, but it's right after dessert and everything. And we schmooze. You talk about nothing for a while. We talk about how much fibers in his diet or something like that, some crap like nobody gets. And then slowly you have a conversation and you sign big deals. but I think blood sugar and whether you're hungry or not really affects it.
I love that you said that.
Ahmad, listen, if my wife is hungry, I will agree to everything she says because, like,
There's no disagreeing with her.
In Arabic culture, we have a saying: "Don't let the judge be a judge when he's hungry." The judge should not be, because everybody's gonna get,
Yeah.
I know we're over time and I apologize. I'm happy to stay on as long as you want, but I will say next week in the final of the 3 workshop series, we're actually going to be talking about some of the critical foundational elements that are necessary for long lasting change. And so this blood sugar comment is actually going to come back next week. So that's awesome. And we're also going to be talking about several other things about how to help you unleash your full potential, what the key is to helping you identify your gifts, and what's going to be really important for helping you to actually be able to put all this stuff into practice. Because again, I don't want to teach you something that isn't truly tangible and practical for your life. So I want for you to be able to walk away with things that can actually make a change for you. So I'll stay on as long as you want. Ask any questions. Feel free to reach out to me. You all are so much fun.
Thank you.
Can't wait till next week.
Thanks, everybody.